Chào mọi người, chào mừng mọi người đã quay trở lại kênh của mình. Mình là học code Cùng Tôi. Thì hôm nay mình sẽ tiếp tục học phần lý thuyết cuối cùng của SQL 2.5. Rồi bắt đầu thôi.
Welcome to this module on using SQL Workshop. In this lesson, we learn about data generator and accessing SQL Developer Web. In this lesson, you are introduced to the data generator utility. You learn the different ways to create a blueprint to generate sample data. This lesson also covers how to access SQL Developer Web from Apex. What is data generator? Data generator is a utility in SQL Workshop to create blueprints and then generate sample data. Blueprints are nothing but JSON files that define the tables and columns that store the generated data. You can use existing tables in your schema, import valid blueprints, or create a blueprint from scratch using the Blueprint Designer. Once the sample data is generated, you can export it as a CSV or JSON file or insert directly into tables. To access Data Generator, from your workspace homepage, navigate to SQL Workshop, click Utilities and select Data Generator. When you click Create Blueprint and choose Use Existing Tables, you get a wizard where you can choose the list of tables, specify the number of rows, and so on. The wizard generates the blueprint and you're navigated to the Blueprint Designer. Use the tree view on the left to select a blueprint, table, column, or custom data source object and modify its attributes on the right. Create new tables, columns, and custom data sources using the context menu. Using the Generate Data and Preview Data buttons, you can preview the data for the tables and columns and export the data to a JSON, CSV, or a SQL file. If a table exists in the schema with the same name, data can be inserted into the corresponding columns. To create a blueprint from scratch, you select From Scratch in the Create Blueprint wizard. Then you enter the necessary details such as name and description. The Add Starter table is enabled by default, which means it adds both a sample table populated with sample data and a custom data source object. You can view these in the Blueprint Designer. Once you click Create Blueprint, you are navigated to the Blueprint Designer. Once you generate the sample data, you can also export the data as a CSV or a JSON file. Now let us see a demo of creating a blueprint from scratch. I'm in my Apex Workspace homepage, and to access Data Generator, I navigate to SQL Workshop, select Utilities, and under Utilities, you can find Data Generator. Here you can see the Data Generator page, and I can go ahead and create a new blueprint. Here I have the option to choose to create a blueprint using existing tables or from scratch or import a JSON file. So first I'm going to create a blueprint using existing tables. I'm going to give it a name. And here I'm going to select the table based on which I want to create a blueprint. I have a projects table in my schema and I want to create a blueprint for the corresponding table. I check the table name and then click on Create Blueprint. This takes me to the Blueprint Designer page, and here on the left side you can see a tree structure where you can see the blueprint table name and the corresponding columns. You can click on each item and modify the attributes on the right. So my projects table in the schema has 5 columns with the following names, and a blueprint was created with similar names. You can go ahead and modify the data source and other values such as maximum value, minimum value, and so on. Once you're done with the modifications, you can click on Generate Data. This step is going to generate sample data of around 50 rows, and you can choose the action which you're going to take next. For example, you can export these rows as file, or you can insert directly into the database. Now, the option to insert into database is available only if the table with the same name exists in your schema. Since we created this blueprint using an existing table, we can see this option. So I'm going to select to insert into the database, since I know that this table has no data in it and I want to insert some sample data. So there are two ways you can insert into the table. Insert into will insert one row at a time, and if any row fails, it will discard that row and insert the next row. Whereas if you select fast insert it to, it will do a bulk insert into the table, and even if one row fails, the entire insert operation is discarded. And here you can see the row scaling is currently at 1x, and row scaling indicates the number of rows that you want to insert into the table. Choosing 2x will insert total of 100 rows into the table. Currently I just want 50 rows, so I'm going to choose 1x. And once you're happy with the selection, you can click on insert data. As you can see, we have successfully inserted 50 rows of sample data into the database. So before you insert the data, you can also preview the data here. And it's going to show you top 5 rows. Okay, let's go back to our object browser and see if the rows have been inserted into the projects table. As you can see, 50 rows have been inserted into the table. Now this is a great way for you to test a functionality by inserting some sample data using data generator. Let's go back to the data generator utility and let's see how you can create a blueprint from scratch. So when you select from scratch here, you can provide a name. You can add a description optionally. And here you can select add starter table. So when you enable add starter table, a sample blueprint will be created to demonstrate various functionalities of the data generator. But you need to remember that no table or data will be added to your schema by selecting this option. Let's go ahead and create the blueprint. And as you can see, it has created some sample columns and table for you. And it has also included a custom data source, which you can go ahead and modify based on your needs. Now this blueprint does not create a table in your schema, and hence when you click on generate data, you no longer see the option to insert into the database. The output format is either a JSON file, CSV, or you can create a SQL insert file. So once you create this file, you can export it to your local machine, and in the future or in another application, you can import it and use it as you wish. Let's preview some of the sample blueprint data that it has generated for this sample blueprint. As you can see, it is now very easy to generate sample data declaratively in Apex. If you're a fan of SQL Developer, you can now access SQL Developer Web directly from Apex. SQL Developer Web, also known as Database Actions, provides a web-based interface that enables you to execute queries and scripts, create database objects, load data, build data models, and monitor database performance. You can access the SQL Developer Web from the SQL Workshop menu. The requirements for enabling the SQL Developer Web menu option are that you must have Oracle REST Data Services ORDS release 23.1.0 running in HTTPS mode, and an instance administrator must select the Enable SQL Developer Web attribute in Administration Services. If there's only one schema associated with the current workspace and that schema is already REST enabled, a new browser tab with a SQL Developer Web session displays as shown in the screenshot on the right. Let us see a demo of how to access SQL Developer Web. I am in my Apex Workspace homepage, and to access SQL Developer Web directly from Apex, navigate to SQL Workshop and select SQL Developer Web. To open SQL Developer Web, you need to REST enable your schema. If your schema is not REST enabled, it shows a dialog asking you to REST enable the schema. Since I have only one schema in this workspace, I select the schema name, and it takes me to the RESTful Services page where I can register the schema with ORDS. I accept the default attributes and save the schema attributes. Now, my schema is enabled for use with ORDS RESTful services, and sample RESTful service is successfully installed as well. Now let's go back to the SQL workshop and try to open SQL Developer Web again. And this will open the SQL Developer Web in another browser window. You are provided with a quick tour to use SQL Developer Web. SQL Developer Web is also called Database Actions, and you can go through the various components available with Database Actions from the hamburger menu. Along with running SQL and PL/SQL statements, you can also use the data modeler, create charts and dashboards, or use auto REST services. So let's try and run a SQL statement for our demo. I have an M table in my schema, so let me query the M table. You can see the results of the SQL statement in the query result window below. You can also see the SQL history, explain plan, and auto trace, just like the SQL developer that you install on your desktop. In this lesson, you learned about the data generator utility. You learned to create a blueprint and generate sample data. You also learned how to access SQL Developer Web directly from Apex. I hope you learned something useful. Thank you for watching.
Ok. Thì xong phần lý thuyết của phần 2. Rồi thì clip ngày mai á, là chúng ta sẽ bắt đầu làm bài ha. Rồi ok. Cảm ơn mọi người đã xem clip. Bye bye.